Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson Teaches Paper 2 Section B Question 5. It's part of the English language revision series of videos I've put together on this playlist, talking you through all of the different questions and strategies of how to approach them for your language papers. So this one is actually normally the second paper that you would sit as part of your GCSE English language, and of course we'll look at the detail of that in a moment. You'll need to be ready to pause this video, that's why that symbol's there at the bottom, just to make your own notes, because I'm going to give you some strategies and approaches, and writing those down and then having a go are the really important next steps for you. So be ready to go off and practice once you've finished watching this video. So let's have a little look then. What does paper 2 look like? Well, quite literally it looks like that on the outside, but paper 2 is the one where inside, as the blue box at the top says, this is the one where you get two sources. I always remember it that paper 2 has two sources, and you would spend 15 minutes reading and highlighting those sources before then section A, which is the yellow box there, which contains those 4 questions, and then it's section B, which is the writing. So yellow box, section A, reading, green box at the bottom there, section B, writing. And you'll be expected to spend, well, 45 minutes as I'm about to show you, but that's the one we're going to focus on in this video. And in fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. Here it is then, at the very top. That's the sort of information box it says. You get something like that where it says spend 45 minutes on this section, reminds you to write in full sentences. Also, the exam board are very good at reminding you that planning your answer will make a difference. That's why they put that reminder there, as will checking your work at the end. Those are 2 things I'm going to cover during the course of this video. Now, beneath that second white box with the more information, that's how the question structure appears. If you want to pause that for a second and read it to yourself, that would be absolutely brilliant. I'm going to launch straight through it. I'm not going to read it out to you aloud. Just going to point out some key things. The structure of this question generally remains unchanged from year to year, which means that to start with, you will almost certainly get this made up quote from a student, which gives you something to respond to. As I say there, it gives you a direction. It almost is encouraging you to have an opinion one way or the other. Questions I often get asked by students for this is, do I need to agree or disagree, or can I write about both? The answer really is you can write about both, but they are looking for you not to go, well, on the one hand I think this, but on the other hand I think this, on the one hand, on the other hand. They're looking for you to actually form a point of view generally on one side. You will be allowed to, and you will need to look at the opposing view, the opposite view to yours, but actually do choose one side to fall down on as your main argument. So that's the starting point then, that red arrow there. Then what they do is they give you the form that you will need to write in. So in that case it says, write the text of a speech. I've done a different video on this playlist which actually talks you through some of the different forms that you can expect to be asked to write for. So check out that video, because that gives you some really useful top tips of things to remember when answering this question. So those are the 2 main parts of the task, the question that you're given. The made up quote from the student, which gives you something to respond to. Then they tell you what sort of writing they want you to do. And then we've got this next bit as well, which is just a reminder, those are the marks that you're given. So it's out of 40, this question. It gets broken down into a 24 and a 16. And the top one is basically your ideas, your structure and your methods and your vocab, as I've put there. That's what it means by content and organisation. And then beneath that you get given 16 marks for your accuracy, which you could talk about as your SPAG, but vocabulary pops up in both of those groups of marks. So your ability to use a wider range of vocabulary does matter. And that's something to consider as you're planning your answer. Excuse me. Right, let's look on then. So if that was the question that you were given, that one right there about everybody in year 10, year 11 being made to volunteer, that's the important thing for community, where would you go and how would you maybe plan your response? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that a possible structure for this is going to be the one that I'm about to make appear now. I think it's a structure which works for almost every question. My advice is don't walk out of this or walk away from this video and go, right, that's the structure I'm guaranteed to be able to use. I can sit here and offer you no guarantees. However, a few years of teaching for this question has taught me that generally speaking, the exam approach I'm about to give you should work. And that's this one here in the yellow box. And I'm going to give you an example of what this actually looks like shortly. So if it doesn't make much sense yet, don't worry. So I'd start off with a description of the problem, or a paragraph which describes a world without the problem. Now by problem I'm talking about, in the other example, it would be the volunteering, the community thing. So describing the world without volunteering, or describing the world where everybody volunteers. Paint a picture in that first paragraph. It's much better than people who go, I think it's really important for people to volunteer because, which is very, very dull. So this one, which I'll give you an example of what this looks like in a minute. Second paragraph, I'd actually define it. So I'd actually say, so volunteering is this, and the importance of volunteering is this. I quite literally would explain what it actually means. Third and fourth paragraphs then, I'd actually start going into a little bit of depth about it, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. And fifth and final, I'd offer my solution or my opinion or something where you respond to the main idea given. So almost a conclusion. The first paragraph and second paragraphs lay out what it is. 3 and 4 start going into some detail, and fifth and finally, you actually lay out what your idea is. So what might that look like here? Well, I've jotted down some ideas because planning really matters, and too many students just don't know what planning means. So again, I'm rushing through this fairly quickly for the length of this video, but if you pause and have another look at that question a minute before I reveal my plan, so if you just want to pause the video now. These are just some ideas in this blue box which I just came up with as very rough ideas that you could then start forming into your main paragraphs. So for example, describing the difference volunteering could make. Now that's what I essentially was talking about in that first paragraph there. Defining it, as we've already said, but then, should be Year 11s be made to? The big impact would be incredible if you had all of these Year 11s. So that's one thing I could explore in my answer to this question. There's also the question of, if you make somebody do it, is that really volunteering? Is it going to be as good a quality, for example, is another thing I could write into that plan. That is a potential problem that would become from the idea of making them all volunteer. Can you make everyone volunteer? Is it actually possible? Can you make students do it during school time? Would you be making them do it after school time? These are some of the questions I would be asking. Maybe we could find ways of encouraging it better rather than just forcing them to do it. So things like the D.of.E., the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, has got a section where you have to actually look at community. So that could be maybe a different way of doing it. But also, ultimately, I'd talk about maybe the difference it would make to somebody else's life. Maybe if you're volunteering, let's say, in a care home or supporting somebody in a charity shop. Those sorts of details, like care homes and charity shops, are the sorts of details that some students miss out on their answer. They just talk too generally and just say, oh yeah, volunteering would make a real difference, it would make the community a better place. You'd actually need to really give me an example, a concrete example, like imagine the smiles on the care home residents who don't maybe get to see so many people, and you could be the one who actually brightens their day, and something more detailed like that. Now on my next slide, I'm actually going to reveal to you an example of the plan I came up with. Basically, that yellow box plan, roughly speaking, the answer could look like this. So here's some other top tips which I'm going to give you in this video which work for my classes as well. And if you are one of my students, hopefully you've heard this before. So I always get my students to try and start with a picture this, or the phrase imagine a world where. Picture this is a particularly good one because it's an imperative to start with. You're commanding your reader, and also it means you've got a colon in there correctly straight away. So that's a good one. Picture this, a country where everyone acts to create a community, a society where everyone contributes to its success, a place where everyone plays an equal part. Whilst this may sound like a utopian socialist ideal, I am in fact describing a place that may not be too distant from where we are now. That's that first paragraph where I actually lay out an example of what it could be like. I'm painting a really positive picture. And then I'd often go into, I haven't done it here, but you could then go, sadly, this world does not exist yet. But it could if more of us were volunteering. And then I've made a link directly to that statement that I've been given. Second paragraph there's my definition of it. I've explained what it is, and then I've thrown in some rhetorical questions there. Notice that paragraph contains 2 rhetorical questions, so I'm already building up my methods. That third paragraph then has a colon in it again, but also notice that paragraph is much shorter. I'm deliberately crafting my paragraphs to actually show my reader, that I'm able to play with my words a little bit and play with my structure. So then I've asked that question, should Year 11s be made to? And then I've used another imperative on that last paragraph. Imagine the difference this could make. Imagine all the sports leaders, litter pickers, painters, helpers, beach cleaners, and so many more. Hopefully you heard there I've got an imperative at the start. I've repeated it, so I've almost got a bit of anaphora going on. And then I use that list, deliberately almost building up the excitement and the idea of it. And then about the idea if you had thousands of Year 11s doing it, what an incredible difference it would make. Those are the sorts of things. Now, that is not a full answer. I often get asked the question, how many paragraphs do I need to write? The plan I gave you earlier contained 5 paragraphs. In the time you've got, which is 45 minutes minus 5 minutes of planning and 5 minutes of checking, 35 minutes, it should be just about doable. I'd certainly like to think that answer I've written there, some of the paragraphs might be a little bit longer as I continued. And it doesn't have to be 5 paragraphs, it could be 7. Again, I'm giving you a very basic structure here. Be ready to adapt it to fit what you are doing and how you write. Let me talk to you. So imagine we've done that now. The final thing we need to be aware of then is the proofreading of your work. And I've put there at the top, this is probably the most important 5 minutes of all. Read it back to yourself quickly, but listen, as I put there. Listen to the sound of what you're saying. Can you hear any words which need upgrading? Can you hear any words which are missing or words which don't sound quite right? Then the next one, can you upgrade words? Is your punctuation there, or actually are you adding some style and effect? If you read it properly, you'll probably find gaps where there should be some sort of punctuation. Don't be afraid of putting in full stops. You don't always have to be super clever, but be ready with your punctuation. And finally, asking yourself, are there enough methods? Could I be using an extra rhetorical question? Could I maybe repeat that sentence starter as you saw me do a minute ago? But whatever you do, I promise you this. The students who proofread their work will gain more marks because they will remove the errors that otherwise you will forget are there. If you just write it and never look at it again, that's not a good idea. Finally then, let's try and pull this all together into some key points. Plan for 5 minutes, super important. And planning is a skill that you get better at the more you practice it. So my advice to you, get some past paper questions and give yourself a 5-minute timer, practice planning. Check your work for 5 minutes at the end. Can't emphasize enough how important that is. Remember to try and use a range of methods like rhetorical devices. There's a video I put on my channel all about those as well, so you could find that one. Punctuation, yes, and vocabulary. And above all, try and make it engaging. If you're going to try and get into this and offer some interesting ideas and be quite interesting to listen to, the examiner is likely to want to read your writing, and that is successful writing when somebody wants to read it. So give it some style. So I'm going to finish up there and say a big thank you for watching this all the way to the end. I hope you found it useful. What you will find is many other videos on this channel. If you find them useful, then why not subscribe, as other people have done, and keep up to date with it all. Above all, I always say at the end of my videos, whenever it comes to any assessment or exam that you have, I wish you the very best of luck. Thanks for watching and goodbye.